Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I welcome Gillian Stein, CEO of Henry's, a family-owned and operated business that first opened its doors in 1909 and is now Canada's largest independent photographic and digital retailer. Gillian takes us through the evolution of the retail brand, the yin and yang of being a mid-sized retailer, and the importance of staying true to your values. Next, Natalie Dumond, certified professional coach and certified Dare to Lead facilitator, joins us for a discussion around the power of brave leadership, courageous cultures, and gives us a sneak peek of what she will be presenting live on the main stage at Retail Council of Canada's annual Retail Human Resources Conference in March. But first, let's jump right into my conversation with Gillian from our studio offices in downtown Toronto. Gillian, welcome to The Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to see you. You and I have known each other for several years and been working together, Retail Council of Canada. But for the listeners at home, so to speak, tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal and professional journey, and your role here at Henry's.
So I'm Gillian Stein. I'm the CEO of Henry's. I've been running the business for the last 4 or 5 years. Never actually thought I would work in retail, to be honest, growing up. So it's a family business, and if you ever grew up in retail, you'd kind of understand that it's not necessarily the first path that you want to take. Yeah. So I actually spent quite a bit of time growing up in this family business. Always had this belief that business could be a force for good. So I actually spent quite a bit of time working in corporate social responsibility. And
good training, as it turns out, for the modern CEO in retail, isn't it?
Absolutely. The reality is it does make for better businesses, and is something that's kind of always been a guiding value in our business. So, but then things change. Life takes you on different journeys.
Sure.
And about 10 years ago, I decided to come back. Felt like there was a lot of other experience that I'd had outside of the business that could really add value. And I think that's actually what I bring to this role is that outside experience. And I don't consider myself a retailer to begin with. And I think it allows me to kind of push boundaries in ways that others might not. Bring
new perspectives and different ways of looking at things. Because you have lots of professionals in the business. And you can hire professional expertise, subject matter experts, but leadership is a whole other thing, right?
As long as you always surround yourself by people who are smarter than you.
Right. So you've been here, 4 years. Tell us a little bit about Henry's, because it's evolved. I mean, I remember coming here years ago, and the film was still happening, but then there's a section. It was funny because I remember tracking it. I was in the store, and I'm like, there's a film section, which is 80% of the store, and then I'd come back, and the film section's 50% of the store. I remember talking to one of your team, and I said, so at what point does digital take over? And they're like, oh, yeah, it already is. And you guys were already on the forefront of that momentous change in your category. So tell us about the history of the business.
So we're 110 years old. So as you can imagine, there's been a lot of change that we have seen. Obviously, when we first started, people didn't sell cameras out of stores, right? That was 1909. So we actually started off, my great-grandfather was a gemologist. So we did watch repair and sold jewelry and things like that. Business evolved over time. In the late 1950s is when the Japanese manufacturers started to create and develop cameras that were actually now accessible, right, in a price and a format that the average consumer could use.
When I think of the high-end cameras in the first part of the century or whatever, I think of the Germans, I think of other, Letitia, I guess, would be those kind of brands, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right, because it was really the Japanese manufacturers that opened it up.
And again, it's that accessibility, right? Because you have to be able to afford it and you have to be able to carry it.
Sure.
So my grandparents sort of saw that photography was coming. 1959, they went and bought 4 rolls of Super 8 film, put it on the shelf. It was very strategic. Put it on the shelf, see how it did. It sold out first day, and they just kept adding more. So by the 70s, we were complete, had decided to move fully into photographic equipment, completely dedicated to that. And throughout the 80s, one of the interesting things you mentioned that, as you know, we were at the forefront of digital. Part of our history is that we had actually had a challenge in the early 1980s where we had made an investment in photo finishing. And between the recession, interest rates, and a photo finishing business that wasn't performing very well, the business actually went into receivership. And so my family bought it back out. It was my parents at the time, and they swore up and down that they would never, ever touch photo finishing again. But it was because of that decision that when digital was introduced, we were very happy to be able to get onto that bandwagon, welcome customers no matter what kind of device they were using, whereas every other retailer in the space was really tied to that photo finishing because that was actually where
that was the revenue
money.
Model, right? It was the razor blade razor kind of revenue model,
right? Exactly. So nobody ever makes money on hardware. So that was so that's what actually allowed us to grow to who we became today. In many ways, was that
what a transformation, right? Because it's not just a matter of introducing new products, and inevitably 110 years is going to be a lot of change in any category, but it's that change from the entire business model, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about the stores. How many stores do you have? And you've done some recent work expanding the business, so tell us about that.
So we've got 30 locations across the country. We go from Nova Scotia all the way to Victoria, actually, so as far west as you can possibly go. We have been, as you said, expanding. So we were, up until recently, predominantly Ontario. That's where the majority of our stores are. But in the last 2 years, we opened up in BC. So we greenfielded there. And then last spring, we acquired the largest digital imaging retailer in Quebec. So that definitely takes us. We're now in every major market in Canada except for Alberta. But at that point, I'm okay. We're I feel good. I feel like we've hit the milestone.
Right on. And now, in Quebec? Is it branded Henry's, or did you?
It's called Lazo. Is the brand that's there. So they also have a long history, 90 years. So you don't want to mess with that, right? There's a lot of value in that. But we're slowly introducing the Henry's brand to try and educate the customers about sort of the bigger picture now of the company and who's there and.
Right.
See how that transition goes.
Role.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a tremendous amount of change in the Canadian retail landscape. You're relatively new to it. Welcome, but 4 years is a lifetime. So there's been so much change. Off mic, we were just talking about the big NRF show and some of the trends there, and some of the stores that people were looking at. So how do you interpret that, or what lens do you look at that from your perspective? You get that lens. See what I did there?
Oh, yes, that was good.
How do you interpret the changes that are happening in retail? It seems, in one way, there's a bifurcation between value and luxury, experience, and efficiency. Where do you play in and around all that? How do you continue to move forward? So
Henry's really focuses on delivering a very unique customer experience. So we have 4 promises that we always deliver, and we feel that these are promises that really make us stand out from the rest of our competitors. So the first is that we won't be beat. And so even though we have never actually seen ourselves as a retailer that plays by price.
Right, not a high-low retailer, price game.
Absolutely not. But it's clearly a really important part of the consideration.
Sure.
Right? And the journey that the customer goes on. What's interesting in our space is that what most people don't know is that price is actually controlled. It's map pricing across the entire category, which means it actually doesn't matter where you shop. You're always going to get the same price. But there's this perception that we're more expensive than our competitors because we deliver higher service and high touch, right? So for us, it's really important that we kind of knock that one off right off the bat, which takes away an excuse from somebody saying, I'm not going to shop there because it's more expensive. So we actually will beat any competitive offer. But then comes our expertise. And so almost all of our sales associates are actually photographers, videographers, or content creators themselves. And so their ability to work with the customer, help them find a solution for what it is that they need and really tailor that is very, very unique. Yeah. And until, technology develops, it's going to be years and years, if ever, when the technology gets to a point that you can recreate that kind of experience
if ever.
Online. Exactly.
If ever. I mean, my own personal experience shopping your stores, right? I'm getting into this podcasting thing, and I was looking for a lav type mic, but there's a million lav mics. So I went into one of your stores and said, okay, here's what I need, and it was great. An associate said, well, you could get this, good, better, best. What's your price? That's tough. That's tough to replicate, if ever.
It is because everybody has a unique solution, right? A unique problem you're trying to solve. So our job is to sort of be a consultant for you. Yeah. So that's a really important part of what we offer. Selection of gear. So we've got the best gear. Doesn't necessarily mean we have the largest selection of gear, and I think that's really important.
It's curated, right? So you have a perspective around.
It's about what do our customers actually need, and making sure we have that. We always will be seen as the authority in the space, and our depth of inventory definitely needs to show that.
Right.
What's also important is that the stores provide that touch and try experience, which again, you can't recreate that. And for a high consideration item, right? Like the products that we sell, they're expensive and they're complex. Yeah. Right? So to be able to come in, touch the product, try it. How does it feel? Is it heavy? How do the knobs feel? Like those things really matter.
Sure do.
So having the best gear, and then finally the customer service. So I was on vacation, and found this little Mexican restaurant that had the best tagline that I'd ever seen. And they said, "Come on and eat. If you starve, we starve."
Right on.
Your customers matter, right? We exist for our customers. So if we don't treat them right, we're all going to suffer,
right?
So it's really important that you build that relationship and you make sure that the customer feels valued and they feel that. And in today's world, you have to deliver an experience where your customer feels a reason. There's got to be a reason for somebody to walk into your doors. Yeah. So not only is it the experience that you offer in the store, but then the service, and that you almost have to take the view that you have to be really thankful that somebody took the time to come into your store, because they have alternatives today.
Infinite alternatives. It's such an interesting point. I hadn't conceptualized it that way, that the risk in your category, in any category, is that you provide this full service and consultative, smart people on the floor, but everybody as well. I must be paying for that somehow, right? And make that, therefore they must be more expensive for the same widget. So that's a perception. I think that's a long-lasting perception, right?
It is. It's very hard, and it's very hard to change that mindset.
Yeah. Let's talk about as you grow the business. So I'm very interested in your perspectives as you grow the business over time. There's some advantages to being small and nimble, and there's some advantages to being a major corporation, right? As you grow your business, your pencil gets a little larger when you're dealing, with vendors, even from, supplies, leases, or whatever. So along that journey, what have you learned about growing the business? The ways you've done, and the materials and the people. How do you grow a business from a few stores into a larger store? What are those lessons learned so far that you could share with us?
It's a great question, because there's some days that I wish we were a one-store shop. Because it would be so much easier. Yeah. On the other hand, I wish I had the budgets, as you said, of the larger organizations. So there's no question. It's an interesting place to be mid-size, especially in Canada.
You're not a small indie, but you're not a multinational or a national, right? Exactly. You're in between.
Exactly. So it's interesting because you're big enough that your customers really demand and expect the same kind of, return policies and shipping times and all of those things, right? That, our bigger competitors can deliver. Yep. So the expectations are there. Marketing budgets are much more challenged. So you're trying to sort of, especially, we're actually the largest share in our category. But our marketing budget is completely disproportionate to the size. And so how do we, you have to find different ways to do that. Access to capital, all of those things, attracting employees. It takes a lot, it takes a different way of thinking. On the other hand, there's the benefit of, we're definitely, for our vendors, we're in a sweet spot, far more nimble than our larger counterparts. Sure. But we can provide a consistency, more than, say, our smaller independent. It also forces you to be more creative. And I think there's a lot of value there, right? So when you don't have a large budget, you got to find different ways of doing things. And sometimes we end up getting employees who are so passionate and want to have a bigger impact on the business that they work for, but you can't do that in a large corporation.
Right.
Whereas if they come here, they can. And so we end up sometimes punching above our weight, I feel, in terms of the talent that we get because of our size and the impact that they can have.
Right.
So there's pros and cons, and it's obviously about taking the challenges and turning those into opportunities, but it's definitely an interesting place to play in, and not a lot of attention is really put on this, I feel, in this area on retail.
You bring up an interesting point, the vendors, right? The vendor relationships. And I've been on the vendor side as well as on the retail side. And boy, you just can't have a couple of big retail partners, right? You need to be clever about how you do your channel management, right? Who and how gets which cameras, or in your case, or which electronics, or which product, and which do I give exclusive, and how do I make sure the market grows in general without favoring one versus the other, right?
Yeah.
When you think about 2000 and beyond, not 2000, 2020. When you think about 2020 and beyond, when you think about 2000, let's go back.
Oh boy!
Oh my God, that was a fun decade. I've been talking to a lot of people about what the future holds for retail 2020 and in the next decade. It's a new decade, so people are trying to pull all these things together and think about, how am I going to grow a business? What's retail going to look like? We're actually talking about a week where there's been a bunch of retailers who've announced they're kind of getting out of the business for one reason or another, right? Some are strategic decisions, but what is the future for your organization from 2020 and beyond? Where's your focus, and how are you going to grow?
So for us, we break it down into three. We call them 3 horizons, right? And I think it kind of helps us to make sure that we're focusing on the right areas at the right time. So we look at our core business. So that's our traditional, retail e-commerce business, selling cameras to consumers. And that is about ensuring that we are, and it's the basics, consistently delivering the best Henry's experience across the chain, right? And that doesn't change much. What does change is, I think, the infrastructure and management and sort of how you ensure that you remain as lean and as nimble as possible, especially as, managing your costs it's so much more challenging now than it was. And again, as talked about the consumer expectations, those come with costs, right? But the prices, you can't charge a premium for it. So, and
you've got stores and municipalities where the tax dollars, the property taxes, all those things, all those considerations, right?
Keep going up, right? You can't control that. So how do we be as lean and efficient as possible and deliver the best experience? In terms of our category in particular, we talk about Horizon 2, that would be where we look at content creation and the rise of content creators. And so as much as for us the smartphone has been really challenging to the traditional digital imaging market, it's actually been really wonderful when you think about how many more people in the world are extremely engaged in photography and videography and content creation, right? How many people want to be a YouTube influencer? There's, I think, the number of channels with over 1 million subscribers on YouTube has grown 75%, and those YouTubers actually create the equivalent of 28,000 full-time jobs. So that's an entirely new world that's growing and exciting. And so how do we ensure that those customers know that they can come to us, right? So we're sort of shifting now to becoming the home for all content creators, because they really don't have a place yet, right? And we talked about podcasting and where do you go and get that information, and that's hard to do. So we're looking at expanding in that area. And then the last part, again, talking about this new customer base that's growing and is exciting and engaged. Well, how else can we serve them? It may not always be by selling them a box, but there's lots of services and there's lots of challenges and pain points that we have. So how do we start to solve for that? And that might not necessarily be through a storefront.
Right.
It may, this is something that we're probably looking at more of a digital first strategy. But I think really is something that will benefit the stores as well, but takes our brand, the customer base that we've built up, our 100 years of history, and lend that to that new customer that's out there and still in need of lots of things that we believe we can help them with.
It's a fascinating perspective. I think a couple of things that you're not new to the business of education, right? You used to write classes on photography, and that's to translate that into something broader is such a great idea. And then the notion that iPhones or digital phones become a gateway to something bigger, right? Well, I took a great picture on this phone, but I wish I could do better. I need more equipment. And, some of the TV I watch, so to speak, TV is YouTubers, right? I watch this great cooking show from Holland, and the guy, he's just got some kit, sets it up. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. So I think you're really onto something. Thanks so much for the time we spent together. A glimpse into your world and your business. It's a fascinating world. And thank you for taking time to speak to the Voice of Retail.
Thank you. It's been great sharing.
Natalie, welcome to the Voice of Retail. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure to talk with you. We're looking forward to having you on the stage. Retail Council of Canada's Retail HR Conference coming up on March 24th. You're a keynote speaker there. We'll get to that in a bit. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal, professional journey.
Yeah, great. So I guess my background is actually in human resources. So I'm really excited to be connecting with the Retail Council HR conference and talking with my fellow peers. So I've got about 15 years of experience in human resources and in the manufacturing, venture capital and technology industries. That's kind of where I've been hanging out. And then recently I've gone out to do my own thing, more as a consultant, as a coach and facilitator, helping in the realm of leadership and what really courageous leadership looks like. So that's kind of where I'm at today. And I just work with all different types of leaders from different stages and ages in their journey, and work with organizations, just showing them how to show up and connect differently in the workplace.
Well, that's a great segue into the let's jump right in. Kind of my first question. I've always been fascinated by this phenomenon, and it's been said before that culture beats strategy in any businesses. And I got to think that leadership plays a huge role in that. How do retailers think about fostering and maintaining a great culture in their business? What's the role of leadership in that? And what does that look like for you?
So yes, completely agree that I do think culture does, beat strategy almost every single time. And it's due to the fact that culture is like the ecosystem that happens within an organization. So it's usually everybody's part of the ecosystem. All employees are a part of that ecosystem. So it's what are they thinking? What are they feeling? And therefore, how are they behaving? So companies need to get really in tune and strategic with their culture and in tune with how people are thinking, therefore how they're feeling and therefore behaving. And I think the best way that you can do that is making sure that you have top-notch leaders. Like if I really wanted to understand how a culture was in any organization, I always tap into leaders because they really help drive the culture forward, and especially through change. Leaders are the magic in any organization.
Is it the case sometimes that the leaders shape the culture and sometimes the culture shape the style of leadership as well? Is there flex in your experience within that dynamic?
Oh, good question. I see how culture is. It really does come a lot from the leadership. It's the personalities, how they think, and how they behave. So, I see a lot, how when a CEO or the executive team and some of the top leaders, how they behave really does trickle down to what you see in an organization and therefore how people think and behave and feel.
So interesting because sometimes you see leaders step into a new role or new leaders brought into an organization, and there always isn't. Everyone's looking for the great fit, right? That perfect fit, and sometimes that doesn't happen. There can be a clash of cultures. Is that what you like? How do you advise when you're talking to leaders about taking on prospective roles or going to new organizations or taking on significant change within their existing organization? What's your best advice?
My best advice for them and what I continue to see that's really effective is to be themselves, to not walk in like trying to be something that they're not, to not walk in and try to live up to what they think a leader should be. The leaders that walk in with self-awareness of this is who I am, this is what I know, and this is what I don't know, and I'm okay with that, they seem to connect and resonate with people a lot better than trying to walk in with, I need to know everything, I need to act like I know everything. It's a different energy that they bring in. So self-awareness is huge, is a piece of advice. And then the other one is self-compassion. Give yourself some grace to try things, to take a risk, to maybe not get everything right and own your failures. That also drives a lot of connection with people around them. So the advice I give them is self-awareness and self-compassion. Because if they do that with themselves, they do that with everybody around them, and it's really powerful.
I've been talking to retailers a lot lately about the focus on their employees and building great teams and particularly retaining employees. It's so hard to find the right people. So retailers, like many industries, of course, and it's not new, are turning their minds more every day to keeping the people rather than kind of acquiring people. They're talking to me about innovative compensation strategies, different work arrangements. It's all different and flexible depending on who they are. What advice can you give the leaders today, or what advice do you give leaders today around making sure that they achieve those objectives? Building a great team, we've talked about that a bit, but keeping the people that are really going to help them succeed.
Yeah, and compensation is really important for sure, and understanding flexible work schedules and making sure that you're competitive as far as that landscape. But I think what really comes down to a leader is helping every individual on your team thrive and making sure that you're really there in service to them. It's a rare thing, and a lot of people are looking for leaders that really do care about them and their growth and their potential. That makes a great leader. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be few and far between. So if you really want to retain people on your team, focus on making them thrive and being there for them, and they'll want to stay. They won't want to go and look for anyone else because they know they've got it great with a leader that really does care about them.
What in your mind are the biggest barriers to building a successful culture? You've touched on a couple in a manner of speaking because you've talked about the positive, but what are the things that you see that are the most common barriers, and what's your advice on how to overcome those barriers?
I don't think people are feeling safe to really show up as themselves and say what they need to say, have the hard conversations. I don't think people are self-aware a lot of the time of who they are, what their strengths are, and what they really love to do. So I think those are some of the barriers that are happening. And I think the biggest one is having people really lean into vulnerability and what vulnerability can do for a person. Vulnerability allows people to take risks. The vulnerability allows people to be creative. Vulnerability allows people to just show up and really be who they are and be okay with that and not listen to critics and people judging them, and they feel safe in the environment that they're in. So I think one of the biggest barriers to that is there is a lack of vulnerability happening within workplaces across North America. People are trying to be something that they're not.
Let's unpack that a little more. Is it about a concern or a legitimate fear that business moves at a pretty quick pace, and notwithstanding the desire to build the right team, that some people are moving in and out of the gig economy. They've got they've settled on a full-time job, and maybe they're just not 100% comfortable that they shouldn't merge or shouldn't morph their behaviors a little bit just to make sure that they're comfortable there? Is there a bit of imposter syndrome going on? Give me some analysis or diagnosis about why people may be showing up as you describe, and then what can leaders do about it?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome is huge. There's a couple of groups that I in what I'm working with, I see tend to suffer from it the most. And some of it is new employees, when they join a team, tend to suffer from imposter syndrome, proving that they need to be there, part of the team. The other group, I call them OGs, the original gangsters, the people that have been there for a long time in an organization and that kind of climb their way up. And they know a lot of change, right? So they're always trying to prove that they know why they're there and that they can be there. And then sometimes it's okay for them not to be. And that can be really hard for them. And then the other group that suffers a lot from imposter syndrome are new leaders that have been recently promoted into a role. And it's a big step for them, and they want to prove that they belong there, but they're coming from a place of hustling for their worth rather than coming from a place of grounded confidence. And that's the difference, right? So those are where I see a lot of imposter syndrome happening within a culture. Instead of people just showing up and being okay with what they know and what they don't know, and then people on the team giving them the grace to kind of learn and grow. So I think the biggest fear that's keeping people out of it is the judgment. We're really concerned with what everybody thinks of us rather than what we think of ourselves. And a leader needs to start to foster an environment through their own actions and showing that vulnerability is okay. Showing up and being yourself is okay and it's welcomed. We want all these different perspectives. Because the worst thing an organization can do is hire somebody and then have only 60% of them show up, right? Because they're hiding a certain part of them. Therefore, they're not taking risks. They're not learning through failure. They're not connecting to other people because they're too afraid of judgment or the repercussions. So a leader's best thing that they can do is really open that space up, allow them to show up, and they do that by doing that themselves. They don't posture, they don't hustle for worth, they don't, judge other people, they don't minimize. They create that environment by showing it and walking their own talk. So that's why I'm really focused in on working with leaders today, is because they really drive the culture.
So more now than ever, the leadership is so important to setting the culture that is what we think so important, even more important sometimes than the strategy, right? You're going to be speaking. You're going to be bringing it home for us for Retail Council of Canada on March 24th. You're going to be on the main stage keynoting. Can you give us a sense of the message? We've talked about a lot of great stuff. Do you have any particular message for retailers out there? Time of tremendous change in retail, as I'm sure you know. As I'm fond of saying, there is no retail apocalypse, but the transformation is real. Give us a hint of what people might expect to hear from you on the 24th.
Yeah, I really am excited to share with everybody where I believe leadership is going, where the future of leadership is going. And it's more around what courageous leadership looks like. And it's what leadership basically coming from the heart space. So there's this great quote that says, in the past, jobs were about muscle. Today, they're about the brain. In the future, they're going to be more about the heart. So I'm really excited to show them the research that backs that up, and then what it looks like practically. And then we're going to be touching a lot on vulnerability and the power of vulnerability and how we can start to use it as leaders and as HR professionals going forward, because that's where it's going. And we want to be the companies that attract great talent, and we're going to do that by making sure that we have leaders that lead with courage. That's going to be the powerful thing. So that's what we're talking about on the 24th.
How can people learn more, get in touch with you, and understand what you do and some of your perspectives? Absolutely.
So they can reach out to me via my website. So it's just nataliedumond.com, basically. They can find me that way, and they can reach out to me through email or my contact page, and that would be great. Happy to make new contacts and talk to new people.
Well, Natalie, thanks for taking the time and joining us on The Voice of Retail. Looking forward to hearing more, and thanks again for your contribution. Such an important time in the retail industry where I can't think of a time where leadership didn't matter more. So very timely and great advice. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate it. Really looking forward to the 24th.
Well, thanks to Gillian and Natalie for being my guests in this episode. Now let's hit the highlights of the retail news in Canada and around the world with a Retail This Week for the week of February 24th, 2020. All right, heading up the news, lots of news going on this week. I guess you can all guess what the number one thing in the news was this week. We'll get to that. But first of all, the case de dépôt, déplacement de Québec, is the pension fund, and they're selling malls. They are an owner of Ivanhoe Cambridge, and they're smart money that's actually getting out of Canadian shopping centers. So it's so interesting. Smart money going in two different directions. We see this time and time again. We see Brookfield getting into it, RioCan getting out, and now the case is selling 25 of their Canadian shopping centers over the next couple of years and moving those assets somewhere else. I guess they looked at the results from Ivanhoe Cambridge results from 2019 and saw a 2.7% negative returns. So time for them to get out. I'm not sure it's probably the case that it is not unlike retail with this kind of bifurcation. Either you've got the best or it really starts to drag. So they're exiting. So that's an interesting story there. So what else we got? We got a new recycling program happening in Ontario. We've got our very own Retail Council of Canada's very own Sebastian Prince talking about what that means and this swapping of ownership and payment. And Ontario, I guess, is going to start by battery recycling. It's a bit of a complex issue. This from the Globe and Mail, by the way, and the case story was from the Montreal Gazette. It's a complex story. Recycling is very, in one way, complex, in other kind of straightforward, but it is massive amounts of dollars. So check that story out. You get a better understanding. Right now, there's already a fee baked into batteries to cover off recycling, but I think what it's going to mean is instead of battery recycling at the curbside, that's how it happens here in my house every couple of months. It's going to be, you'll see more of that in stores and more private contractors doing that. That's what I think it says, but check out the Globe and Mail article, and we'll keep a close eye on that one. Maybe we'll get Sebastian on the podcast, and he'll help explain it and take us through it. From Retail Insider, Chinese variety Yo-Yo-Yoso to enter Canada with plans for multiple storefronts. So I always like to pick up on these ones that say, hey, we're going to open a whole bunch of stores, kind of against the tide of closing stores, so to speak. What do they focus on? I didn't know this brand, but they're focusing on 8 categories: beauty, cosmetics, home, gift, fashion, accessories, stationery gifts, about 5,000 products, 500 new items in each store each month. And they're going to open lots of stores in Canada, so we wish them the best of luck. View from the C-suite, how Bailey Nelson hopes to compete with the Goliath. Of course, the Goliath, we're talking about eyeglasses, and there's a couple of Goliaths, I guess, of course. Warby Parker is not the Goliath they're talking about. They're talking about the big eyewear company, and Bailey Nelson, Australian company that opened up in a licensing agreement, opened up stores in Canada. Now they closed them in 2017, and then it re-entered the market with corporate-owned stores later in that same year. So now it's got 17 locations and 3 others by the end of June this year. Total of 20. HBC, Chair Richard Baker wins shareholder backing to take Canada's oldest retail private. So this has been a long, long saga. Congratulations to Richard Baker for finally getting across the finish line. So now, by the way, HBC has Hudson's Bay, or what many Canadians know as the Bay, 89 of the Bay's 42 luxury Saks shops. And of course, you've got Saks off 5th. And you no longer have Home Outfitters. And of course, that's Lord & Taylor has been sold. So interesting, I saw in the news that there was rumors that Amazon was going to buy that Lord & Taylor building off WeWork for $1 billion, which I guess would be pretty good swapping money, because I think they paid $880 million for it. From HBC, or HBC earned $880 million. I hope they cashed that check. And now the rumor is they're going to flip it to Amazon for office space is what they need. But I don't know. I'm not sure I get that, given that Amazon's taken a huge amount of office space in and around Hudson Yards. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. A couple of videos. We've got who have we got? We've got the former Macy's CEO talking about how the trade war and the coronavirus has demonstrated that retail supply chains are too dependent on China. Of course, bing, 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 you guessed, coronavirus is the topic. I could have put 20 articles in here on the coronavirus, all of which would be very interesting. Another interesting, that's a great video from CNBC. Another great video, Matt Shea from the NRF talking about the forecast for U.S. retail growth is phenomenal. It's like, I'll get to it a bit later, but the consumers are resilient. Now, the caveat to that is what happens with the coronavirus. So, of course, we're all keeping an eye on that for a whole bunch of reasons. What else we got? RCC advocates for swift ratification of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. Our very own people, Jason at McClinton, was in testifying on that, what is known as Bill C-4. I actually did an interview with Carl Littler for a recent webinar, and so he helped understand the process, or helped explain the process. It was a great interview, so we'll get that on the podcast maybe next episode. It is fairly timely because it helps us understand where are we at with all that ratification of the new trade agreement. So short answer is it's looking good, and I think the political will sounds like listen to Carl, the political will is to make it happen, and it could be in place by the fall. What else we've got? We've got the coronavirus update, of course, from RCC. And if you haven't had the chance to listen to the last episode, if you skipped an episode, great episode on the coronavirus. It won't be my last. We'll see what and how this evolves, but I'll continue to stay up to date on that issue. Back to what we heard from the NRF in the U.S. Retail sales expected to decline 3.5%, 4.1% in 2020, unless the coronavirus derails the growth. And that's what the NRF is calling the ball at for 2020. It's tremendous growth. It's more growth we're going to see in Canada. Canada finished the year 2019 with 1.56%, I think, of core retail growth. And I can't imagine it's going to be higher than that this year, even without the coronavirus. We're calling for talking to retailers, we're calling for more of a flat is the new up kind of year again. We don't see a tremendous upside. We didn't see a lot of downside either, but we certainly didn't see the upside that the Americans are seeing. What else? We got Chinese consumers. That was from CNBC. Chinese consumers snap up yoga mats, video games, condoms as coronavirus keeps them at home. By the way, I was reading an article that said Corona beer has lost billions or millions of dollars. Boy, that's unlucky. In being, everyone thinks it's the connection between Corona and coronavirus. Not new. Coronaviruses aren't new. There's a great episode on the New York Times The Daily podcast talking about the history of coronavirus, what makes this one different. Have a listen to that if you want to lose some sleep tonight. Walmart in discussions to sell their stake in Asda. I guess they wanted to merge Asda and Sainsbury's last year, and the regulators wouldn't let them. And I think Walmart is like, well, if I can't structure this deal the way we want, then we probably aren't interested in that market at all. Which is, Walmart's a big enough company they can be everywhere, but really want to be very successful in the markets they're in, and or not be in them. Blue Apron considers selling itself as it bleeds customer. This in Forbes. Kind of see this coming. The online meal kit business. I'll be talking to the great Sylvain Charlebois about that later this week. I'm attending the Restaurants Canada conference and doing a few interviews. Be a great episode, and I wanted to touch base with him about what he thought overall the market continues to be for these meal kits. There continues to be appetite, but just the business model seems so tenuous. I mean, Metro bought Miss Fresh and then turned around and sold them. Just said, we're just not interested. The business isn't working the way we'd like to see. The numbers aren't there, and that's even incorporating it in to the mainline Metro grocery stores to acquire customers. So anyway, I know there's more successful models out there, but Blue Apron does not seem to be one. So I guess the idea is somebody's going to buy them, or they're just going to go poof and go away. My bet would be someone is going to buy them. Who knows? Amazon could buy them for a song relative to Amazon, and then Amazon could use more help on their food kit business. I don't know if Blue Apron is the solution for that. American Dream Mega Mall in New Jersey sets March opening for the first round of retail shops. And this is about 45% retail, 55% entertainment, expecting 40 million visits annually. It's a few miles west of Midtown Manhattan. It's about 90% leased. It's in New Jersey. And I'll be talking to some executives from American Dream, actually. I've got that teed up for Shop Talk when I go to Shop Talk in Vegas. So we'll get some insights on what they're thinking. For independent retail, it's a good independent retail section this week. Pot shops could double if London company gets licensed. So Mihi Cannabis, our good friends at Mihi Cannabis, got their license. So congratulations to Stefan Thomas and the team at Mihi Cannabis. They've put so much effort into pre-planning, and they want to get 10 stores up along the 401 corridor and ultimately 75 across the province. So great ambitions. They've got some great patient money behind them. So we wish them, Jean Lepine and the entire group well. And speaking of cannabis, here directly from Cannabis Retailers Live at the Retail Council of Canada Cannabis Forum in Toronto, and that will be later on in April. I will be on the main stage interviewing folks from the Ontario Cannabis OCS, the Ontario Cannabis Store, which is the exclusive distributor to retailers in the province. And so everything you wanted to ask about the distributor, what we're afraid to ask, you're going to hear about that. Hear that from the stage. So learn more, go to retailcouncil.org and learn more about the Retail Cannabis Forum. Let's see what else. Canada's oldest running store is moving above ground. Long and McQuaid is opening up on Danforth. Great music store. Hobo Cannabis announces Ontario expansion plan. They're looking to bring 15 locations. Started in the West in Vancouver and then in Ottawa, and now what they call the Donnelly Group. They're looking to expand significantly. So we wish them the best of luck. What else do we got? In technology, should robots have a phase? Good article from the New York Times talking about these robots, multiple robots that are starting to appear in stores. That should they be kind of personalized with a funny face and give them birthdays and make them part of the team? And how do robots and humans interact? You see actually a fair bit of that. I remember this great article in, I think it was actually New York Times or Forbes, talking about how the Amazon employees treated the robots like colleagues, and they give them names, and it just personalized and made the workplace easier. I think there's a whole bunch of psychology behind that, but it's interesting to keep an eye on. Speaking of Amazon, Amazon looks like they took their Go store concept and expanded it. So this is the Amazon cashier-less grocery store. And, I'm less exuberant about this. Everyone else seems to be like, game-changing turning point. It's 10,400 square feet, basically 5 times a Go store. I've been in the Go store. It is a great experience. The technology in that ceiling, I'm not sure. It's basically the same format, just lots more stuff. I mean, I did see some alcohol in there. Of course, then you're going to need people in there to validate ID, just as you would in any store. They actually pulled that out of most of the Go stores, but it sounds like they're putting it in to this one. And it's not like people-less. There's lots of people stocking the shelves, and mostly it's packaged goods. But there's also other things. I would take a look at this. I mean, it's interesting, of course. Cashier-less, not the first ones. I mean, really, in some ways, Hama from China is ahead of where Amazon is. And, of course, the real big news for Amazon and grocery is when they open their grocery store that is not an Amazon Go, a big version of Amazon Go, but an actual Amazon grocery store that kind of puts that along that spectrum with Whole Foods on one end and a convenience store, C-store concept like the 25 Amazon Go stores. So anyway, always interesting. Never underestimate our friends at Amazon for innovation, that's for sure. So keep a close eye on that. Flourishing click and collect. It is driving e-com growth at Loblaws. It's actually from their results from last week. I didn't pick it up. It came out a bit late for the episode, but they generated for the first time $1 billion in online sales in fiscal 2019. That's a huge milestone. Food, pharma, caregiving services, and beauty. So that's not all food, but it is $1 billion in online sales. So that's a pretty big milestone. Speaking of websites, Lowe's says its redesigned website will help it catch up and fend off rivals like Home Depot. That's a lot of responsibility to freight on a website, but good luck to our friends at Lowe's. And that was from CNBC. In the Click and Collect article, there's lots of them to choose from. I chose the one from Canadian Grocer. What else? Walmart boosts store roles and e-commerce fulfillment. There's a lot of good news about Walmart coming out these days. And again, I think they posted something like 37% growth in their online business, and they're just really, really, putting that market first forward. How to compete with Amazon basically in the States and get that product closer. Well, they've got the stores, so they're just figuring out how to do that and do that more efficiently. And that is an article from Supply Chain Drive. So that is hitting the highlights for the news. Lots going on. It's a wrap on this edition of The Voice of Retail. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple iTunes or your favorite podcast platform, including Spotify. And by the way, thanks to everyone out there, I am now the #1 retail podcast in Spotify. So I'm pretty thrilled about that. So thank you all the listeners out there. And speaking of all the listeners out there, I got a note a while back from my good friend Chris Parsons from Home Hardware, and he was on the road out in the great Atlantic provinces and wound up with a gentleman named Dan Hardy, Retail Sales and Operations Manager at Home Hardware out of Sydney Mines in Nova Scotia, and they were talking about podcasts, and lo and behold, shout out to Dan, who's a faithful listener. So Dan, thanks for listening and being part of the community of the Voice of Retail. It's really exciting to hear that my reach is out there, and that hopefully I'm helping and informing retailers from coast to coast. That's very exciting for me. So thanks again for listening, and Chris, thanks for bringing that to my attention. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Until next time, have a great week.